All right, everybody, welcome to the main stage here at the Boston Marathon Expo. We hope you're having a great day so far. We are joined now by Boston Marathon race director, the one and only Dave McGillivray. Dave, how are you doing?
PK, good to be with you. Unfortunately, not in person, but next best thing, I guess.
Next best thing, we're bringing the running world together here this week as we all celebrate the world's oldest continually run marathon. Dave, it's been quite a year. We've all had to make a ton of adjustments. We're going virtual now. How you doing? How you doing? You going to be out there?
That's a loaded question. I'm living the dream, but it's a little bit of a nightmare, kind of a dream. TK, I've been doing this for over 40 years, putting on events. And I always thought that this industry we were involved in was bulletproof, right? There was no kryptonite, in this industry, and nothing was going to take it down. In recessions, we're still strong, and good times we're strong, and the walls of intimidation over the years have crumbled, and philanthropy has entered the space. People are believing in themselves. They're running for a greater purpose. I mean, everything was just going in the right direction for all the right reasons. Running is sort of a very convenient thing to do. Lace on the shoes wherever you are in the world and head out the door. The health and fitness benefits of running, putting on events, the economic impact in the communities within which we conduct events. Again, the philanthropy, the money raised for so many great and worthwhile charities. And bam, March comes along and this thing just knocks us to our knees. One by one, over the cliff they go. And DMSC Sports, we had 35 events, lock and loaded. This was going to be our best year ever. And then as they all started canceling and some going virtual, it started getting nerve-wracking because we were like, well, what do we do? How do we stop this? How do we pivot? So that's what we've had to try to do, is go in a different direction for the time being hopeful that it's going to come back, and not only come back, but come back in a even stronger way. After the bombings, the moniker Boston Strong, and now after this, running strong or whatever the moniker will end up being, we will be back. It's just the tough part for all of us is the uncertainty as to when and what it might all look like.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, as someone who puts on races, these are things you think about. But there's thousands of other runners, people who rely and enjoy competing in races, and they're doing it this week virtually for the Boston Marathon experience in their own home, in their own area, at their own time over the course of this week here. What sort of guidance would you give to these folks who've had to make so many adjustments to their running life, knowing that running's been a huge part of your life?
I think the first thing we all have to do is think about the word perspective. We are the lucky ones in that the sport we have chosen is one that we can still participate in, if you will, go out and run. Whereas if you're a hockey player, a little leaguer, or basketball player, if you like to bowl or anything else where there's gatherings, especially indoors, you're out of luck, or have been for the last 4 or 5 months. Whereas we haven't missed a beat in terms of being able to go outdoors and run. And the fact that I sit here in my home office every day and look out the window and I see people going by on bicycles or running or walking that I never even knew lived in my neighborhood. They were just in their bunkers and never came out. And now, whoo, voila, there they are running and walking. And I'm like, wow, there goes our future customer right there. So, on the one hand, it really has, sort of curtailed sort of what we would like to do, and that is participate in races, perhaps. Races have been the target, the magnet that gets us out of bed every day and get out on the road. But from my perspective, if you are a true runner, then you're doing it for a lot of other reasons, and you can still do that. The passion of just getting out there, the whole concept of health and fitness. So the idea that, for me, I think running has morphed into a concept of feeling good about yourself. I've always felt that, the toughest part about running a race for people who haven't done one yet is signing the application, and then earning the right to sort of do the event, and doing the work and towing the line and answering the gun and running the course and crossing the finish line and getting a medal, and magic happens. People go home feeling good about themselves. And that's the very foundation by which we accomplish anything in life, right? So it's all about self-esteem and self-confidence. And that still can happen. And so for me, it's not just about participating and being competitive in road races. So my recommendation would be to take advantage of as much of this different time as you can. I mean, in any tragedy in life, you go through those 5 stages: denial, no, this isn't happening. No, I can't believe this is happening. Then you anger, you get really mad. You get mad at people, at things out of your control, but you're still mad. Then you start negotiating. It's like bargaining. It's like, well, how can I get around this and all that? And then you get a little depressed. It's like, wow, woe is me, as we all do, full of self-pity. And then finally, there's this thing called acceptance. And you have to accept reality. And when you accept reality, then there's the basis by which now you do a reset. And it's all about expectations, right? So for me, I would say to people, set some goals that you never would have set before, whether it's like with me, I run my age on my birthday every year. Maybe you might want to do something like that, or run every street in your neighborhood. Say, I ran every single street in my neighborhood, or even on the opposite end, pull back. Maybe this is the time to pull back and do more maintenance, get that injury fixed that it's been nagging you for years, and you never wanted to go get it fixed, because then there's that 3 weeks of downtime. Well, there's no better time to have downtime than now. Go get it fixed. So the idea is, turning negatives into a positive, and that's what I'm doing during this particular time.
You've gotten creative with recreating what you did in years ago when you ran from Medford, Oregon to Medford, Massachusetts, and you've created a virtual event here. Just tell us, quickly about how that's going.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, virtuals were starting to bubble up, mainly with events that sold out. And then people were left on the curb and like, hey, what about me? I'm over here. And it's like, sorry, no more room at the inn. Well, the next best thing is, well, we can create this virtual for you. And so Disney did it, New York did it, some other event did it. But I never really thought much of the virtual myself. It's like, you go run around your neighborhood and, pay you $50 and you get a medal in the mail. But now it's the only other option, right? So, if you can't beat them, join them. So when everything started falling apart within our schedule, we said to each other, at DMSC, hey, we got to come up with something, guys, to keep a pulse. So Brian Lyons, who pushed Rick Hoyt for the last few years, God rest his soul, he just unfortunately passed away. Ryan called me up one day and said, hey, I have an idea for you. I said, what's that? He said, why don't you do a method to method virtual? I said, really? You think people would want to do that? He goes, I would. I think it's, yeah, without a doubt. And engaging people and putting a team together and incentivizing each other to get out there and cover the distance and see how many miles collectively a team has done, and you can race other teams and the whole bit. And I said, yeah, let me talk to the team and see. And we said, yeah, it's a great idea. So we put it all together in probably 3 weeks. And we got a really good turnout. 1,500 people have have done this or are still doing it. And it sort of ceremonially or officially ends on August 29th, which is the date I finished my run in Medford, Mass. So we're going to go to Medford City Hall on the morning of August 29th and have a ceremonial finish with a break tape and the mayor of Medford and some dignitaries and whatnot to sort of conclude it, even though people can continue to run it. They haven't reached Medford, Mass just yet.
Yeah.
But it's been a blast, you
Yeah.
know, and I've really enjoyed the emails that I've received from people saying, hey, we're in Des Moines, Iowa right now, or hey, we're running over the Rockies, or whatever it is.
Right.
And so again, a classic example of making, lemonade out of lemons.
You're to be commended for it. It looks awesome, and what I'm seeing come through looks great. So good
Yeah.
work. The Dave, the Boston Marathon, you've been involved with the BAA since I think 1988. You've been the race director since 2001. This race has changed a lot. I mean, let's just up until 2019, the race had changed a ton over the course of 30 years of doing it. And while every race is notable year after year and brings its own unique set of challenges, there's been a few where flexibility and resilience has been of you and the DMSE team and the folks at the BAA has been on full display. One that immediately comes to mind is 1996 and the 100th running of the Boston Marathon, and an enormous undertaking in and of itself. Can you what on earth was that? It was the largest road race in the world at the time. And if I remember correctly, we had just gotten crushed by a snowstorm in Hopkinton about like a week, all through Boston, about a week or two before, right?
Right. Yeah, that obviously, it took 2 years to sort of plan that out. At least that was the initial concept. And we had expected and were planning for 25,000. And we had a lottery for a certain number of people to register to. So long story short, right after the first of the year, unexpectedly, we hadn't shut down registration yet. We didn't self-impose the field size limit. We just thought X amount of qualifiers would typically register 9,000, 10,000, as had done the year before. And then we picked 15,000 out of a lottery. And so there's our 25,000. So right after the first of the year, someone opened up the floodgates because about another 15,000 qualified runners all of a sudden just signed up in a matter of what seemed like weeks. And all of a sudden we're faced with a little over 38,000 people. And we almost had to pretty much start all over again. We had been approached by Championship Technology. We decided to take a pass on that because we didn't want to use that system for the very first time at such an important year in the race. But then when it grew to almost 40,000, I went to the BAA and said, hey folks, we don't have a choice. We cannot manually time this thing now. So we went with the chip. And that was the first time the chip had been used in the United States at that level of a road race, right? And so we had to really make a lot of adjustments and a lot of changes just in the last 3 months. I almost felt like we spent a year and 8 months teeing something up, then it all got scrambled up, and then we only had 3 months left to kind of regroup and fix it all and change it all. And it was interesting. It's still one gun, one start. No waves. And we lined people up on Main Street, Hayden Row, and Grove. And the way we set it up was that a couple of crowds would leave Main Street, and then Hayden Row would dump out. Then the rest of Main would dump, and then Grove Street would come in and dump out. So it was like bing, 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 like this. And people said to me, it's going to take about 4 hours for everyone to cross the starting line. I said, no, it's not. It's going to take less than 30 minutes. They said, no way. It took 29 minutes. And we knew that just through the fact that everyone's seated properly, you know, with the qualifying times. And so we were really efficient, even though our starting line's only 39 feet wide. So we have this 39-foot wide street in a little town of Hopkinton to start our race, where the New York City Marathon has 17 lanes on the Verrazano Bridge, and Chicago has what it has. And here we have the largest road race ever, and we have 39 feet to do it within. But it all worked out magnificently well. And for me, that probably was, if not the highlight, one of the top 3 highlights in my personal experience with the Boston Marathon.
But just how did you get the fields dry in Hopkinton?
So what we ended up doing is we
Oh,
called
that's
in.
I mean, there's snow.
Yeah. Well, we had to get plows out there and plow out, and we had to take out, not just plow, but take out all the snow. You can't have snowbanks, 5 feet high and then bring in 40,000 people. It doesn't work. So we had to remove all the snow, not just plow it out of the way. And then with trying to dry the fields and all that, we had helicopters come in, and they got low and they started blowing away, a lot of the residue, if you will, the rain, the wetness and all. And we were able to get it in good enough shape to be able to make it work. But man, there were so many different things working against us. This thing probably shouldn't have happened, but when it did, it just all clicked. Yeah. And that's all preparation. That's all the team working real hard. The transportation, the medical, the this, the that. Everyone worked really hard to make sure that this thing came off well.
Dave, I think that race was on April 15th, 1996.
Yeah.
In April in Boston, I mean, the Boston Marathon basically goes between either April 15th or April 21st. Those are the dates on which the third Monday will fall. And within that span, the weather is changing a lot in April. Spring is arriving. And I would imagine, and we'll talk about weather today, but we've had very hot marathons, we've had very cold marathons, and I would imagine that the risk of such snow is being a threat is much lower when the race is on the 21st as opposed to when it's on the 15th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's still the risk, we know that going in, and we know it could be close to 90, and we know we could have a blizzard. And so, it's a concept of, crises management. It's just developing plans, the what ifs. Yeah. What if this were to happen? What would we do? What if this were to happen? What would we do? So what people see most of the time is plan A. And that is everything is okay. And we go with the original plan. But in our back pocket or in the top drawer is plan B, C, and D based on hypothetical tabletop exercises that we do throughout the year, teeing up these crazy scenarios that could present themselves that we don't want to be caught flat-footed. No, you can't plan it all out to a T, but, you shouldn't be like a deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, here it is. What do we do now? You would have already at least had conversations about situations like that. You know what the chain of command is, who's in charge of what, who to turn to for what. You have a good sense for timelines. You know the animal you're dealing with. So, and we have been confronted with pretty much all of it, as we can discuss. But, every type of weather you can almost have an experience with. We now seem to have had it the Boston Marathon.
For a while, there was, I think, a prevailing consensus that, at least in recent memory, the 2007 Boston Marathon was one of the most difficult races from a cold and wet weather standpoint. And then came 2018. Looking at those 2 years, Dave, they're different races. I think 18 had more runners than 07. But which of those 2 years in your mind was more difficult?
Definitely 2007. Okay. Again, we're learning as we go too. So once you get through a bad weather year, the next time you're confronted with something similar to that, you're even more prepared, of course. But 2007, we were told the week before the race by a local meteorologist, we are going to experience a storm of epic proportions. I was like, oh, I can't believe you just said that. Of course, everyone is just now in a tither. It's like, what does that mean? What do we do? Are they going to do the race? And it just threw everything off, right? Even though the forecast was somewhat accurate, it's just, oh my goodness, what do we do now? So we had many meetings, about mitigating those conditions, but we decided to go ahead. The morning of the race, I got up around 3. I looked out my hotel window, and the rain is going sideways. The wind is howling. Of course, we're in Copley Square in Boston, where it's crazyville there. Even on a good day, it's windy. Yeah. And I was like, what do we do? And I'm firing off phone calls to the National Weather Service, calling Tom Grill, waking him up, saying, Tom, calling, our folks out in Hopkinton, what's it look like out there right now, guys? The long and short of it all with that one was that one meteorologist I was talking to from the National Weather Service said, I do see a break in the weather around such and such a time. And that was the year we changed the starting time from noon to 10. And it was a big deal that we changed the time, but now the weather became that big deal, not the earlier start. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the earlier start meant that we were closer to the storm than when the storm was going to go away.
Okay.
So it worked against us a little bit, but and the thing is that, runners, and I'm one of them, so guilty as charged, right? Runners think they can run through anything. And the fact of the matter is they probably can. They go out and run every single day of the year. So they're getting acclimated to every conceivable type of condition. And then when race day comes, they've already run through whatever it is that we're being dealt with on race day. It's just us dealing with 20, 30,000 of them. So yeah, they can run through almost anything, but can we manage through everything? We have to deal with 10,000 volunteers and all the spectators and porta-johns and water stations from blowing over, and the list goes on and on and on. So when we're having to have to make decisions, we're looking at a big picture perspective, not an individual perspective from the runner's standpoint. So it's really tough. And I've always said, if you don't fire the gun, no one gets hurt. So if the idea is safety first, which it is, then one way to be safe is don't fire that gun. But at the same time, that this is the Boston Marathon. You just can't come back next week. We'll do it again. People have earned the right to be here. People have qualified first time in their life after trying for 20 years. And we're going to say, sorry, go home, come back next year. It's not easy to do, to pull the plug. So, we decided to go ahead. If the problem was, we had to decide by around 5 o'clock, because once you start loading buses and sending people out there, the way they're probably going to get back, no matter what you do, is run. So if you're going to cancel it, don't send them out there, right? And here are you looking at the box going, uh-oh, we got to decide right now. And so something like that we learned. So when 2018 came along, we sort of had the experience of 2007, and I think we just had our plans and our decision-making. We had a unified command center now in Hopkinton. We never had that before. We had a unified command center in Boston, and the library, we had that before. So there was a lot more things in place to be able to, more efficiently and intellectually, I guess, make decisions as to whether it's a go, no go. When you say go, it's interesting because I remember on some bad weather years, I would stand on the starters platform and I'd say to 30,000 people, hey, this is a team effort, guys. You know, that's you and us. And there's 30,000 of you. We can't fit all of you in our medical tent. So what it really does come down to is personal responsibility.
Mhm.
You have to take personal responsibility for yourself. Yeah, if something not good happens, we'll be there to catch you and to help you. But we can't do it for 30,000 of you. So please take personal responsibility. And typically that's what saves us most of the time.
One of the scariest things that you deal with as a race director is heat, right? Not cold weather and rain, but heat. And when it comes to personal responsibility, you know, you look at 2004, 2012, especially, but other years like 14, where the temperature and the mercury continued to rise during the day. But 2012 was an extremely hot year, and the message of personal care was really prevalent from the BAA, I thought. But that's a whole different end of the spectrum for race management, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, one way of imposing personal responsibility on all the runners is that we, at the last minute, offered a deferment for the first time, where we said, hey, if you feel that the conditions are too extreme for you to participate in, you know, we'll defer your entry to next year. And, you know, over 2,000 runners took us up on that.
And this was 2012, right?
Yeah.
And the temperatures were going to be
89.
In the high 80s, right?
Yeah, 89. And interesting, because in 76, the Jack Foltz year, the run for the hoses, it was really hot in Hopkinton, as we know, but they were running into cooler temperatures. This year, it was hot both on the front end and the back end and all along the whole way. So it never got any cooler as you got closer to the ocean, to Boston. And we knew that. So we said, this is a little dicey, guys. But so we had to at least make that offer. And a couple thousand took us up on it. I mean, at the end of the day, we were prepared for mass casualties. We got them. We transported 250 to area emergency rooms and treated over 2,000 in our medical tents. And again, what most people on the outside looking in don't understand is that, you know, when you transport 250 people to emergency rooms, you're taking up all those beds in the emergency room. So if someone goes down in a community within which you have all runners in their hospital, those hospitals go on diversion, which means somebody now has to be transported a further distance away to some other hospital. Well, the communities don't want to see that happen, and I don't blame them, right? So we learned from that year too, and we started coming up with other scenarios where we would not transport as many people. We'd have our own DMAT tents and be able to provide a higher level of care than just maybe an American Red Cross station could handle. So again, it's a learning process. And I've always said there's no such thing as failure. It's a learning process. So every year we're learning more and more as we go along. So yeah, 2012 was, I would say it was, you know, arguably our toughest year ever.
We spoke with Jack Foltz here on the main stage this week, and we talked about 1976 and the temperatures. And he mentioned the sea breeze that came in as he got, you know, into Newton and into Brookline and into Boston, and it was a savior, really. But he also mentioned the tremendous support he got from hoses and spectators and people helping the runners with the hose, the runner's sign, and everything else. That was the same case in 2012.
Great point, because as you know, I run the course after everyone. And so I think I started my run that year at around 6 o'clock at night. And as I'm running, I was both filled with amazement and just feeling really great, and then anger at the same time, because the anger was kind of facetiously anger, like the trash all over the place. There was so much trash. And I said, we pride ourselves in cleaning up after ourselves, right? But the trash wasn't ours. it was the trash that spectators created by virtue of the fact that they ran into stores and bought bottles of water and popsicles and ice packs and all this other stuff. And the evidence of that was all along the course. And I said, that's like the sixth man in basketball. They saved the race for us, the spectators, because they were the stations between the stations and really helped us help them, help the runners. So yeah, that's what happened in 76, according to Jack. And it really happened at a very, very high level in 2012.
Did you have forgive my inability to do math on the fly. Had your streak begun in 76?
Yeah, mine began officially in 73. So I ran 70. I ran that hot year too. I was a couple of minutes behind Jack. No, what he ran 2:20, I ran, I think, a little under 3 hours or something like that.
That's a heck of a feat with no water stations on the course and temperatures in the 90s.
Yeah, it was.
In between the aid stations, the spectators stepped up. But one of the things that is most remarkable, I think, for you and for anyone who runs the Boston Marathon are the incredible volunteers that are organized by the BAA and Mary Miller and Elena Belanger and Elizabeth Worthing before them to bring in 9,000 to 10,000 volunteers every year to help put this thing on. Can you just speak about the importance volunteers play?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, the BAA does all the planning, to develop the playbook. And then a phenomenon occurs because they sort of take that playbook and hand it off to 9,000 or 10,000 people. Most, they don't even know who these people are. And say, thank you and good luck. And so de facto, the volunteers become the image of the Boston Marathon. It's so interesting because, when I hear from people after the race who have run it, maybe they've gone back to their hometown and they'll email me and say, wow, that was a great race. Those volunteers were unbelievable. It's the first thing they mention is the volunteers. And when you think about, say, 10,000 volunteers and 30,000 runners, that's one volunteer for every, 3 runners. So that's a lot. That's a lot of resources, a lot of manpower. And I've always said that our greatest asset is not even our history or our tradition. It's our collective experience of all those people. You have volunteers who've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, some 50. So as they return and as they get better and better and better at what they do, so arguably a case can be made, they're the best at handing out water, or they're the best at driving lead vehicles, or they're the best at handing out race packets of anyone on the planet because they've been doing it so long and they've learned so much.
One of the things we're learning from our volunteers, from the runners, the whole running community more broadly, is its resilience right now as we go through this. But when we talk about resilience, Dave, we certainly have to talk about 2013 and what happened in Boston on April 15th and the resilience that followed as we built up for 2014 and the recovery. And I know you've spoken about this topic more times than you can probably remember, but just some top line takeaways, Dave, from you as you reflect on that now 7+ years ago.
Well, I remember getting to the starting line the morning of the race, and I was like, oh my goodness, look at this day. This is perfect. We're going to have an epic year. This is perfect. And we had this 26-second moment of silence at the starting line for the victims of the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I just remember standing there, and it was so quiet. We had made announcements throughout the entire town of Hopkinton. Everybody just shut down. And the feeling was just threw chills up your body, right? And little did I know then at 10 o'clock in the morning that 6 hours later, we were going to be experiencing our own tragedy. But the day went on, and it was great. Gunfired, all the runners took off, great race. I was on a lead motorcycle. Everything was set up perfectly. I crossed the finish line, went around to everyone, checked everyone out, went in the medical tent. How's it going in here, guys? Very little carnage, not much going on. Great day. Went to the bleachers, saw my family, gave them a hug. And then I had texted Tom and said, hey, everything's going great. Can I just head back out to Hopkins and do my run? And he says, yeah, beat it. Go for it. I said, okay. Told everyone I was leaving, get out to Hopkins, stood on the starting line. All of a sudden my phone rings. Hey, you gotta get back here. I said, well, what's going on? Two explosions. And I thought, oh, generators, something, building fire or something. And then I thought about my family being at the finish line. I called my wife, and there's no, cell service went out. So we got back to Boston in 20 minutes. State police drove me back, going 100 miles an hour down the pike, get into the security area that had been totally evacuated. But I got in because of the state police got me in. And the first thing I did was I went into the medical tent. And a few hours before that, I was in there and there was hardly any business. And now I went in there and there's a lot of business, but none of them were runners. And this is serious. And then I left the tent to go up to the bleachers to find my family. And officer stopped me and goes, hey, where you going? And I said, I'm going up to the bleachers to see my family. He says, you can't go up there. And I said, well, I'm the race director. Here's my ID. He said, it's not your race anymore. And that really hit me about obviously how severe this was. And so eventually I was able to find out my family was okay. And we went back to work. And the only thing I could do is to help those 6,500 runners that got stopped and try to help them with their gear bags. And then, police said, hey, you can't send anyone to the baggage buses anymore. We don't know what's down there. I said, well, I understand that, but we're not going to get rid of these 6,500 people unless we give them their gear, because it's got their plane tickets, their passports, their hotel keys, their car keys, whatever, and they're not going anywhere. So we commandeered, and I can't believe we did this, TK, myself and Rich Havens, Kevin Cummings, and a whole bunch of volunteers got together and said, let's get those bags off that bus. So 10 of us just took 6,000 bags off the bus and laid them all out on Berkeley. And we had the runners come over and fish through them and get their bag. But the eerie thing was, cell phones were going off in the bags. And we could tell that those are family members in Des Moines, Iowa, worrying about their runner loved one. Are they okay? And we couldn't answer all the phones, right? So the whole thing was obviously surreal. And eventually everything, got settled. And then I went home 2 days later. I saw my little son, Luke, and he come up to me, he gives me a hug, and he said, Dad, he says, I never want you to direct that race again. And he associated my job with danger, that these things are dangerous. And I said, no, they're not dangerous. This is, and then 3 months later after recovery, he said, Dad, remember I told you I never want you to direct that race again? I said, yeah, Luke, I remember. He goes, you know why? I said, why? This is a 7-year-old kid. He says, because I want to direct it. And he had processed this and got through it, as we all did. And then came 2014.
Luke's a big kid now.
He's a great kid. He's 14 and he's hammering as a runner right now. So his ultimate goal is to cross that finish line too.
We all collectively looked ahead to the 2014 Boston Marathon. The field was bigger, the spirit with the stage was bigger, the eyes of the world were on us. You held the starter's pistol out there in Hopkinton, and then I think you hopped on a lead motorcycle and you watched Meb Keflezighi win the thing. What a day that must have been, Dave.
Yeah, so right after the bombings, we had to, out of respect, attend wakes and funerals and go through that whole grieving process. And then And then the world started calling saying, we want in, we want in, we want in. And how do you deal? We let everyone in, we would have had 100,000 people. So we said, how do we harness all of this? So not only did we not do what we normally do, and that is go through a whole critique or, after action report process, because we just didn't have the time to do that. For the race itself, we had to jump right into the planning of the next one. And we didn't even know what the next one was going to look like for months. And I remember talking to public safety, and I said, let me ask you a question. Are you going to build security around the event, or are we going to have to build the event now around security? And they said, no. You build your event, we'll build security around it. Well, as things went, the opposite happened. I couldn't decide where this tent went or this automobile went, this truck, until we were told what we could or couldn't do. Well, that wasn't until like at least 6 months out. So you add that whole layer of security, which we needed and which we're grateful for, on top of increasing the field size to almost the same size as the 100th. How are we going to do this, right? So we had another whole wave of 9,000 more people added to the 27,000 we had the years before. So we had 36,000 and this level of security. How are we going to do this? But it was a whole different event, right? As we all know, I saw more people out on the course and more signs, Boston Strong and we will not be denied and all that. So yeah, it was an epic year. And, I went to dinner a couple of nights before with Meb. And as we're walking back to the hotel, I said, so what's your strategy for Monday? So he says, well, I won't tell anyone, but this is my strategy. And I said, okay. Well, I'm on the motor scooter following him to a T. He was doing, I knew exactly what he was doing because he told me this is what he was going to do. I'm taking it out and let him catch me. And when I get the turns, I'm going to do pickups to gap it. I said, okay, I get it. Boom, gap, stuff like that. When he hit, to turn at the fire station, he put the hammer down. When he hit the turn at Cleveland Circle, put the hammer down. So that's how he was able to gap it. And then, obviously he didn't know he had it until probably going under the Mass Ave bridge or so. But that was epic. That was an epic year, never to be duplicated.
Dave, Meb, I think it wasn't until Boylston Street, and we'll talk to him here on the main stage, but it wasn't until Boylston Street, I think, when he looked over his shoulder. But were you looking over his shoulder? Because the TV camera showed number 2 coming on hot.
So it went, I was timing it. And of course, I can't say anything. I never said a word to Meb because you can't do that, right? But I'm looking and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the gap was around, in coming out of the hills in Newton, the gap was probably close to a minute. And then it went to like 58 and then, just started counting down. And it got as close as I think it got to 7 seconds. And I was thinking, whoa, he did all this work. And now this guy's just in the last mile, just going to take it. But I still have this sense that, I don't know, divine intervention. I don't know what's I just have this sense that he's going to pull this thing out. And then you're right. He finally did look over his shoulder. And I think it was like, whoa, where did he come from? I mean, and then he gunned it and he was able to keep the gap. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Wilson Chabet.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, he was pumping his fist on Boylston Street. And I think we were all like, oh baby. Almost.
And the fact that first American since Craig, the fact that he had the names of the 4, folks who died, it just all surreal. You couldn't have written a more inspirational script than what actually played out.
Dave, the virtual running of the Boston Marathon here is upon us. We've touched on a few recent years and a few things that make this race so special. Some of the people who will be running the virtual marathon this year, it will be their first Boston. It will be maybe their first marathon in some cases. What advice would you share for them as they prepare to become a part of this race's history and as they prepare to run their own virtual marathon. I mean, you did your own in your own neighborhood on Patriots Day, so you must have some guidance here for folks.
Well, there's two aspects to it, TK. One is just running 26.2 miles in your own neighborhood, and then how do you justify in your mind that this is the Boston Marathon? So there's two things going on here. I think the BAA has done a great job with this app that they're building to help simulate race day in terms of what runners will be able to listen to while they're running and seeing while they're running, and to simulate similar experiences along the Boston Marathon course. At the same time, it's not easy to run 26.2 virtually by yourself. I've done it literally hundreds of times, obviously, given all my birthday runs and given running across the country and all that kind of stuff. So I've run 26.2 on my own probably 300 times. And I think the idea is to be intelligent about it. Don't try to be a hero, if you will. But at the same time, what I would suggest as Dave's tips would be, and people might decide it's better to do it their own way, like point to point or whatever they want to do. But certainly you have the luxury of choosing your own course. Boston's a tough course, and it can beat you up. The only way to run Boston well is to know the course, and if you're lucky enough to train on it, so you have a good sense for the downhills and where the uphills and then downhill again and all that. But my PR is on the Boston Marathon course, not because necessarily I was in the best shape of my life when I ran my PR, but I know how to run that course. I've done it 47 times. So choosing a course, I think, is critical. I like the loop concept because typically I'm usually by myself, and I don't like carrying a lot of stuff with me, a lot of fuel, and so I call home base. So I created this 3.6 mile loop, and I go do it once, and I'm home. If I have to go to the bathroom, if I have to get something to drink, bing, bing, bing. It might be a 15-second pause. Bang, do it again, do it again, do it again. So if anybody wants to join me, they know where I am at all times. I'm out on that loop, right? The other beauty is that you have 8 days within which to select a day. So look at the forecast. If it's 90, 90, 90, 60, you might want to pick the 60, and not, be a martyr and try to bang it out. So people say, oh yeah, I'm going to do it on the 7th or the 8th. I said, why are you picking a day now? It could be like 95 degrees that day. So wait, and then, strategize your training and your planning to be able to kind of pick a day, maybe a week out as you're looking at a long range forecast, and then focus on that one. So, weather, picking the day, time of day that you run, designing your own course, neighborhood friends, having your kids, if you have kids, jumping in and out. That's what I have done, and that's what I will do again. I did it on Patriots Day, but I'll do it again during this September 7th to 14th time period.
I'd say that, it's almost like scheduling your longest long run, right? Like finding the time that's going to work. Except for this long run, you'll earn a Boston Marathon medal, which is a pretty cool thing.
Exactly.
For everyone who's doing it. Well, Dave, thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have you with us here on the main stage at the Expo. Do some shopping while you're here at the virtual Boston Marathon Expo, and we certainly hope to be back together in real life, sooner than later.
Thank you, TK. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. And then